I've been sitting with a question, and I don't have a neat answer for it. What do Black women do while institutions are failing to meet their responsibility? Not how do we become more resilient, not how do we become communicate better so people will finally understand us, and definitely not how do we fix every system that is harming us. I mean, what do we do while the institution is still the institution? While we're still working there, leading there, consulting there, trying to pay our bills there, trying to do good work there, and trying not to lose ourselves in the process. I started asking this question differently after I listened to a recent Equity in the Center webinar. Some of the language was new to me that they used, but the experiences were not. Within the first few minutes, Carrie Ann Suarez said something that landed in my body. She was talking about the documentary of their organization and their board. I haven't watched it yet, but she was talking about and describing how, in this particular situation with her board, they recognized that systemic bias was operating in their organization. Now, Carrie Ann's experiencing this meant that she didn't have to first produce a mountain of receipts to convince everybody that the bias was real before they were willing to address it. That was the beauty of what I heard. And I remember feeling relief, not because that had been my experience, because it hadn't. The relief came from realizing that there are people who get it. There are actually institutions, or at least people inside institutions, who are capable of recognizing that systemic bias can be operating in their organization without requiring the person experiencing it to become the investigator, the prosecutor, the expert witness, and the defendant. And then after that, I felt the sting because I've experienced the complete opposite more than once as an employee, as a leader, as a consultant. And this webinar started giving me language for experiences I had already lived. One of the panelists, Whitney Parnell, talked about people weaponizing equity around what she described as the misconception of comfortability. And that happens at all times. She also talked about what can happen when people assert a flip in power, where a woman of color may have the leadership position, title, or role, but in practice, I took it as she doesn't have the power people claim she has. Another panelist on this in this webinar was Dr. Janae Bonsu Love, and she used another phrase that stayed with me: racialized gendered scrutiny. That was heavy. She said a board can take concerns seriously without racializing gendered scrutiny to define a leader's entire tenure. And one more panelist, that was Carly Hare. She talked about how our identities can be ignored, invisibilized, exotified, depending on the climate and the culture that we're operating in, the climate and the culture of the organization. And I thought, wait, I know something about this, not just professionally, I know something about this personally. Years ago, I was a deputy director for a department at the city of Seattle. We had successfully completed a major project that I had led, and my director had been invited to present that work at a conference in North Carolina. Now, what happened next is the story. There was a change in mayoral administration. My director was terminated. Before she left, she asked me to take her place presenting at the conference. It was my project, so I did what I would do when you're doing your job. I participated in the conference planning. I prepared for the conference and the presentation, made the travel arrangements, and there was another part of this trip that mattered to me personally. My daughter was attending college at the time in Charlotte, and her birthday was the weekend after the conference. So I made separate plans with my own money to stay through the weekend and, spend some time with my daughter. Then, about 2 weeks before the conference, I was called into the mayor's office. Actually, I was called into the deputy mayor's office and told that my services were no longer needed as the department deputy director. I was being terminated. I asked to stay on longer to help with the transition because my director was already gone and I was next in line. So my end date was extended and I went to Charlotte to present the work. While I was there, I received a call from the city attorney's office. I was being accused of using this conference trip to look for a job in Charlotte and to spend time with my daughter on the city's dime. My heart sunk during that phone call because that became an ethics code violation charge. And here's that document because I want to stop here and show my actual receipt. This isn't something I reconstructed from memory. These are the charging documents that exist. Now, it states that I was charged with a material violation of the Seattle Ethics Code related to that trip. But there's another receipt. After the Seattle Ethics and Elections Commission heard that matter, and the commission voted unanimously that I had not violated the ethics code. So the formal process eventually cleared me. But here's what I've learned: being cleared doesn't necessarily undo what an accusation sets in motion. The minutes of that meeting don't tell you what happened to me afterward. They don't tell you about looking for work for months. They don't tell you what it feels like to Google your own name and see an accusation attached to it, while the finding that you didn't violate the ethics code isn't showing up in the same way. They don't tell you about losing confidence or feeling embarrassed or financial instability. They don't tell you about deciding to leave Seattle. I had bought my first home there, and that meant something to me because I grew up with a single mom who rented throughout my entire childhood. I finally bought a home, and I was able to do it before my mother did, and I did it without a spouse. And I ended up losing that home. I moved across the country to Charlotte, North Carolina, where the cost of living was lower. I left relationships, connections, professional networks. I left my community. I didn't even tell many people what was happening to me. I told my mom. I really didn't want to tell my dad because somewhere inside me, I had decided that I'd done something wrong, something that demeaned our family name. As you can tell, that's hard for me now to even say. Still, eventually, I took an administrative position. After having been a deputy director, that felt like 20 years of professional experience had been completely erased. I wanted to sue. I wanted to run away. And I was ashamed. And I kept asking some version of, what did I do wrong? Back then, I had language for racism. I had language for being unsupported, and I understood organizational dysfunction. But what I didn't have the language for, and I have that language now after, examining my experience at the intersection of race, gender, organizational power, institutional process, and individual decision making. And I want to be very precise here. Having more language today doesn't mean that I suddenly know every motivation behind every decision somebody made years ago. It means I have more questions available to me than what did I do wrong? Well, now I can ask what else was operating here? What happened organizationally? What happened institutionally? What was happening with power? What was happening with leadership transition? What happened when an accusation became attached to my professional reputation? Who had the power to create that narrative? Who had the power to correct it? And how quickly did each of those things happen? Those are different questions. And this is where I want to move beyond my story, because two of the women from that webinar have research connected to exactly what we're talking about. Dr. Janae Bonsu Love is the primary author of a building movement project report called Beyond the Glass Cliff. This report describes women of color leaders as sometimes being simultaneously hypervisible and invisible, closely scrutinized yet routinely discounted. It describes something it calls structural burnout. Not simply, I'm tired and need a vacation. Structural burnout is more than that. It emerges from sustained exposure to racialized and gendered stressors embedded in organizational systems. And here's the number that really shocked me. 55% of women of color executive directors identified burnout as a reason they were considering leaving their roles, compared with 37% of white executive directors, male and female, right? So that's not an individual self care problem. That's a systems question. Now, Whitney Parnell's Service Never Sleeps research gives us another piece. Their Black led project engaged 117 Black executive directors, deputy directors, race equity officers, and consultants. And through interviews and surveys, they found that about 80% of race equity officers surveyed said the average Black leader received little to no organizational support to help them be successful in their role. So I share that to say, when we keep telling Black leaders to become more resilient, I need us to ask, resilient against what? And why does the person experiencing the conditions, the negative conditions, become responsible for developing the capacity to withstand them? The Service Never Sleeps research gets even more specific about Black women. Black women in the research talked about three familiar expectations. In the webinar, they were called the tropes. Angry Black woman when she gives instruction or holds someone accountable. The mammy, who is expected to take care of everybody without reciprocal care. And the magical superwoman, who can carry more fix more, absorb more, and somehow keep saving the day. Whew, that's exhausting. Think about what happens when those three tropes collide in one workplace. We want you to lead, but don't make me uncomfortable. We want you to care for everybody, but don't expect reciprocal care. We need you to fix the problem, but don't use too much authority. Be decisive, but watch your tone. Be exceptional, and don't make one mistake. One Black woman in the research described constantly questioning whether she sounded too confident, too assertive, too sharp, or too decisive. Her conclusion was simple: it's exhausting. I know something about that exhaustion, and I suspect some of you do too. Now, I want to say something that I think really matters. Maybe you did make a mistake. I make mistakes. I mean, Black women make mistakes. Black leaders make mistakes. That's called being human. Actually, all leaders make mistakes. The Service Never Sleeps research explicitly names this too. Black leaders can cause harm, should be accountable, and need room to learn and grow. But it also describes that Black leaders being held to a standard of perfection where a misstep can become evidence that they are somehow unfit for leadership. Those are two different things. Individual accountability is not the same thing as institutional accountability. If I made a mistake, what did I do? What impact did it have? What needs repair? And what will I do differently? That's mine to carry and to hold. But the institution, they have questions too. Questions like, did our policies work? Was our response proportional? Did bias affect how we interpreted that happened? Do we respond consistently when different people make comparable mistakes? Did leadership create the conditions for success? And what should the organization learn? What systems should we change? An organization doesn't get to put all of its learning onto an individual employee and then call that accountability. There's another finding in Beyond the Glass Cliff that I think is important to share because sometimes we count representation and assume equity followed it into the room. The report analyzed philanthropic grants in the care and the economic justice sectors. Women of color led organizations received about 32% of operational grants, but their share fell to 25.6% of infrastructure funding, and then 17% of capitalization funding, the kind of investment that helps build long term strength. So think about that. You can be funded to do the work without being resourced to build the conditions that make the work sustainable. And that makes me think about leadership differently. Presence isn't the same thing as power. You know this. Being invited into the room isn't the same thing as being supported once you get there. Getting the title isn't the same as having the authority to lead. Being asked to transform an institution isn't the same thing as being given the resources, the trust, and the protection required to transform it. The org chart may say you have power, yet the culture tells you whether you're actually allowed to use it. And this is where the conversation comes back to wealth for me, because our bodies are in these organizations too. The Service Never Sleeps report talked about the health toll and weathering associated with racialized stress. One leader in their research said, something I wish we'd stop ignoring. We need to stop relying on resilience and grit as the lifeblood of being a Black professional. Yes, because I am not interested in teaching Black women how to tolerate more harm. I'm interested in what it takes for us to live, to lead, to create, to love, to rest, to experience joy, to make change, and to remain connected to ourselves while doing it. Our bodies should not have to become the place where institutional dysfunction gets financed. If you're watching this and something is happening at work right now, I want to talk directly to you. You may not be the problem. And I don't just want you to know that intellectually. I want us to figure out what it means to know it in our bodies. Maybe you did make a mistake. Learn, repair where appropriate, change what belongs to you. But don't accept somebody else's entire narrative about who you are. And when I say get outside yourself, I don't mean abandon yourself. I mean see the pattern. Ask what else might be operating here besides me. That's where my own I to the fifth power disrupt the status quo racial equity journey helps me. First, identify what's actually happening, not what I've been told is happening. What am I observing myself? Second, interrogate. What else could be operating here? Could it be power? Could it be race? Could it be gender? Could it be organizational dysfunction, leadership, policy, history? Could it be fear or even defensiveness? Who benefits from the current interpretation? Next is interrupt. What patterns am I unwilling to keep participating in? What boundaries belong here? What narrative needs to stop? Fourth is implement. What needs to happen differently, individually, interpersonally, institutionally, and systemically? The fifth is introspect. What am I learning? What do I need? What do we understand differently together? This isn't 5 steps to becoming better at surviving injustice. My framework is cyclical, not linear. It's a practice for making meaning, for interrupting patterns, and for choosing differently. And sometimes the answer isn't yours alone. Now, there's another number I don't want us to miss. 98% of the Black leaders surveyed by Service Never Sleeps named community as very important to the success of Black leaders. That one doesn't surprise me. I understand the power of being believed differently now. I understand the power of someone who can say, I saw that too. Someone who can help you test your interpretation without immediately assuming you're in the wrong. Someone who will tell you the truth if you are wrong. Someone who can help distinguish this part belongs to you and this part doesn't. That's not an echo chamber, that's a witness. And witness can be a form of care. Community isn't responsible for fixing the institution either, but community can help keep the institution from becoming the only narrator of your reality. Now, maybe you're thinking, okay, Kimberly, that's great, but I'm still in it. Still need my paycheck. I still need the contract. I still report to that person, or I still have to go back into that meeting tomorrow. I hear you. Right now, hope may feel like a luxury you can't buy. And that's real. I'm not going to tell you to just stay hopeful. Sometimes you don't need hope yet. You need clarity. Enough clarity to ask, what is actually happening here? What belongs to me? What belongs to them? What belongs to the organization? What am I carrying that was never mine? And sometimes we need other people to help us see those answers because being inside a system can make it difficult to see the whole system. I wish I had understood that years ago. I don't have to turn what happened to me into shame. I don't have to accept someone else's assessment of me as the truth about me. And I don't have to pretend I'm hopeful before I'm ready. Clarity can come first. And I have to tell you this because the timing was almost ridiculous. I was working through all of this recently: the shame, the systems, the mistakes, community, hope, everything. And when I finished answering a question about what I would tell another Black woman going through something like this, I accidentally hit my earbud and turned my music on. And guess what was playing? Yeah, Optimistic by the Sounds of Blackness. I just sat there because apparently optimism decided it didn't need an invitation. And maybe that's where I am. Not finished, not fixed, because fixed isn't necessary. Not stronger, because something hurt me, but clearer? Yeah, clarity is on approach. I haven't landed yet, but I can see some things from here that I couldn't see before. So, I'm not ending this conversation with a list of things Black women need to do better. I'm ending where I started, with a question. What do Black women do while institutions are failing to meet their responsibility? And maybe another question belongs right beside it. Who or what helps you stay connected to reality when a system is trying to convince you that you're the problem? I really want to hear from you. Not the polished answer, not the professional answer. What are you actually sitting with? Put it in the comments. Or if this feels too personal for a public comment, come join the Experience Wealth community. That's where I share the wealth exchange, resources, practices, and conversations about care, power, healing, and what it takes to stay well while pushing for large scale change. And if this conversation made you think of another Black woman who has been carrying something that may not belong to her, send it on over to her. I'm Kimberly Archie. This is On the Ground. And around here, we're going to keep talking about what actually happens on the ground. not just what organizations say is supposed to happen. I'll see you next time.